February 27, 1945, 3:47 p.m., near Goch, Germany. Lieutenant James Bannon watched through his periscope as the Tiger II emerged from behind the rubble of a destroyed farmhouse, 600 yards distant. The massive German tank's frontal armor gleamed dully in the winter afternoon light, 200 millimeters of hardened steel that had turned aside every Allied shot thrown at it for the past 18 months. Bannon's hands were steady on the controls of his Churchill tank, but his mouth had gone completely dry. The Tiger's 88mm gun was already traversing toward his position. Before we continue with Lieutenant Bannon's incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to Goch, Germany, where Lieutenant Bannon was staring down the barrel of the most heavily armored tank in the world. The Churchill A-30 Challenger that Bannon commanded wasn't supposed to be here. It wasn't supposed to exist at all, really. The British War Office had initially rejected the entire concept, but 3 years of watching their tanks burn had changed a few minds in Whitehall. James Michael Bannon was 24 years old, born and raised in Coventry, where his father had worked at the Standard Motor Company before the war. James had grown up around machines, helping his dad rebuild engines in their cramped garage behind the terraced house on Far Gosford Street. He was short for a tanker, 5 feet 7 inches, but that actually helped in the cramped confines of a tank turret. He'd joined the Royal Armoured Corps in 1941, the week after Coventry's second major bombing raid. His childhood home had survived, his primary school hadn't. By early 1945, Bannon had been in combat for 14 months. He'd seen things that still woke him up at night, but nothing had prepared him for the problem that was killing British tankers faster than German bullets. The German Tiger II, called the King Tiger by Allied intelligence, had entered service in late 1944. Its frontal armor was 200 millimeters thick, sloped at an angle that made it effectively 240 millimeters. Between September 1944 and February 1945, British forces had engaged Tiger IIs 47 times in northwestern Europe, 47 engagements, 3 confirmed kills, 38 British tanks destroyed. The mathematics were simple and brutal. If you saw a Tiger II before it saw you, you retreated. If it saw you first, you died. The standard British 75mm gun couldn't penetrate the frontal armor at any range. The newer 17-pounder could, theoretically, penetrate at ranges under 500 yards if it hit the lower glacis plate at exactly the right angle. But getting that close to a Tiger II meant crossing 1,000 yards of open ground, while the German tank methodically picked you apart. Lieutenant Peter Morrison had been Bannon's closest friend since training camp at Bovington. Morrison was from Edinburgh, tall and perpetually optimistic, always talking about the pub he was going to open after the war. Morrison's, he'd said, simple as that. He'd promised Bannon a job as head bartender. They'd shaken hands on it the night before the Rhine crossing, January 31st, 1945, near Cleve. Morrison's Cromwell tank had encountered a Tiger II at 200 yards. Morrison followed doctrine. He retreated, trying to put terrain between his tank and the German behemoth. The Tiger's first shot missed. The second shot struck the Cromwell's turret ring at 100 yards, penetrating completely. The ammunition inside cooked off. Morrison's crew never had a chance to bail out. The battalion recovered what remained 3 days later. Morrison's body was identified by his wedding ring. He'd gotten married on his last leave, just 6 weeks earlier. His widow received the telegram on February 4th. She was 4 months pregnant. Bannon had helped carry the remains to the Graves registration unit. The smell of burnt flesh and metal had stayed in his nostrils for days, no matter how many times he washed. That night, lying in his bedroll in a frozen barn, he'd made a silent promise to Morrison's memory. There had to be a better way. The problem wasn't the crews. British tankers were well trained, experienced, brave to the point of recklessness. The problem wasn't the tactics. British armoured doctrine had been refined through years of hard combat in North Africa, Italy and France. The problem was simple physics. You couldn't penetrate 200 millimeters of armour with a 75 millimeters or even a 17-pounder gun at combat ranges. The Germans had created a nearly invulnerable fortress on tracks, and the Allies were paying for every yard of German soil in burning tanks and dead crews. But James Bannon had noticed something in the technical reports that filtered down from brigade headquarters. The War Office had been testing something new, something that most field commanders thought was a waste of resources. The 32-pounder, officially designated the Ordnance QF 32-pounder, it was a gun that shouldn't have worked. The British tank design philosophy had always emphasized reliability and mechanical simplicity over raw firepower. The 32-pounder violated that philosophy completely. It was massive, 16 feet 5 inches long, weighing over 2 tons just for the barrel. It fired a shot that weighed, as the name suggested, 32 pounds, exactly twice the weight of the 17-pounder's ammunition. The engineers at the Royal Ordnance Factory had designed it specifically to kill the Tiger II. The muzzle velocity was 880 feet per second, with standard armor-piercing ammunition. The penetration figures were theoretical but staggering: 221 mm of armor at 1,0 yards, 186 mm at 2,0 yards. On paper, it could punch through a Tiger II's frontal armor at ranges where the German tank couldn't effectively return fire. On paper, the War Office had mounted exactly 12 of these experimental guns in modified Churchill tanks, creating the A30 Challenger variant. The modifications were extensive. The turret had to be completely redesigned, widened, and reinforced. The recoil system was borrowed from anti-aircraft guns. The ammunition was so large that the tank could only carry 48 rounds instead of the standard 84. Most importantly, the 32-pounder had never been tested in actual combat. Every engagement report, every penetration test, every performance figure came from firing ranges in England. No one knew if it would actually work against a real Tiger II, under battlefield conditions, with a crew's lives depending on the outcome. The first 3 A30 Challengers had been delivered to Bannon's regiment on February 15, 1945. The delivery came with strict orders from divisional headquarters. The tanks were experimental. The crews were not to take unnecessary risks, and detailed reports were required after any engagement with enemy armor. Bannon had volunteered immediately. His crew, Gunner Corporal Thomas Webb, Loader Private David Hughes, Driver Lance Corporal William Patterson, and Radio Operator Private Robert Chen, had all volunteered to transfer with him. They'd been together since Normandy. They trusted each other completely. Chen was the youngest, just 19. Born in Liverpool to Chinese immigrant parents who ran a small restaurant near the docks. He joined up the day after his 18th birthday, lying about his parents' permission. He was the best radio operator in the battalion, could fix any electronic equipment with a screwdriver and patience, and he never stopped talking about the garage he and Morrison were going to open in London after the war. 50-50 partnership, they'd agreed. Morrison and Chen's Auto Repair. After Morrison died, Chen had stopped talking about the future entirely. The A30 Challenger was unlike anything Bannon had commanded before. The turret was cavernous compared to the cramped Cromwell he'd trained in. The 32-pounder dominated the interior space, its massive breech taking up what seemed like half the fighting compartment. The gun's recoil mechanism hissed softly, hydraulic fluid under pressure, waiting. The ammunition was enormous. Each armor-piercing shot was as long as Bannon's arm, the projectile itself a solid slug of hardened steel designed for one purpose, punching through the thickest armor in the world. Hughes, the loader, had needed 3 days of practice just to get comfortable with the weight and the loading rhythm. The first time they'd test-fired the gun at a range behind the lines, the concussion had been so violent that Chen's nose had bled from the overpressure inside the turret. The spent shell casing had ejected with enough force to dent the turret wall. The sound, even through their padded leather helmets, had left all of them partially deaf for 6 hours. But the shot had gone exactly where Webb had aimed it, and the practice target, a salvaged Panther tank hull set up at 400 yards, had acquired a hole the size of a dinner plate punched clean through both sides of the turret. Maybe, Bannon had thought, just maybe this could work. They'd had the A-30 Challenger for 12 days without seeing combat. The Allies were pushing hard into Germany now, February 1945, and German armor was becoming scarce. Most of the remaining Panthers and Tigers were being held back for a final defensive line, or had been knocked out by Allied fighter bombers, or had simply broken down and been abandoned for lack of fuel. Bannon had started to wonder if he'd ever get a chance to use the 32-pounder in actual combat. Then, February 27th, the regiment had pushed into Goch, a small town in northwestern Germany that sat astride the road to the Rhine. Intelligence had reported the town lightly defended. Intelligence had been wrong. The Tiger II had been hidden in a prepared position behind the destroyed farmhouse, its commander waiting with the patience of a hunter in a blind. It had knocked out 2 Cromwell tanks before Bannon's platoon had even realized it was there. The 3rd Cromwell, commanded by Lieutenant David Foster from Surrey, had tried to flank the position. The Tiger's gunner had traversed smoothly and put a shot through the Cromwell's side armor at 400 yards. Foster's tank had burned for 40 minutes. No one got out. Now the Tiger II was turning its attention to Bannon's Challenger. Bannon keyed the intercom. His voice was steady, years of training suppressing the fear that wanted to close his throat. Webb, target, tank, 1,500 yards, 11 o'clock. Identified. Webb's voice came back immediately. The gunner was from Manchester, steady as a rock, had been a competitive rifle shooter before the war. If anyone could make this shot, it was Webb. Hughes, load armor piercing. AP up, Hughes confirmed. The young loader from Wales had gotten the massive shell seated and the breech closed in under 5 seconds. He was getting better. Patterson had already stopped the Churchill, the engine rumbling at idle. The driver knew his job. A stable firing platform was essential for accuracy at this range. Chen was silent on the radio, but Bannon could hear him breathing through the intercom. Quick, shallow breaths. They were all scared. Bannon watched through his periscope as the Tiger II's gun finished traversing. The massive 88mm barrel was pointed directly at them now. At this range, the German gun could punch through the Challenger's frontal armor as easily as a hot knife through butter. They had perhaps 10 seconds before the Tiger fired. Webb, Bannon said quietly, this is what we've trained for. Just like the range. Aim center mass, frontal glacis, fire when ready. Roger, Webb said. There was a pause, maybe 2 seconds, while the gunner made microscopic adjustments to the sight. Firing. The world exploded. The 32-pounder's report was like being inside a bell when it struck. The overpressure slapped Bannon's face inside his helmet, and the entire 30-ton tank rocked backward on its suspension. Smoke and the acrid chemical smell of propellant filled the turret instantly. The recoil system shrieked, hydraulics absorbing the massive energy of the shot, and the spent shell casing ejected with a metallic clang that echoed even over the ringing in Bannon's ears. For a moment, maybe half a second, maybe less, nothing seemed to happen. Then Bannon saw it through the periscope, watching as if in slow motion. The 32-pound armor-piercing shot struck the Tiger II's frontal glacis slightly left of center. There was a flash, bright even in the afternoon daylight, and a shower of sparks as the hardened steel projectile met 200 millimeters of German armor plate at 880 feet per second. The shot punched through. The Tiger II seemed to pause as if surprised. Then the internal ammunition detonated. The massive German tank came apart from the inside. The turret, all 38 tons of it, lifted 6 feet into the air on a pillar of orange flame and black smoke. The explosion was so violent that Bannon felt the concussion wave even at 500 yards, rattling the Challenger's hull. The Tiger II's turret came down offset, canted at an angle, flames pouring from every hatch and vision port. Secondary explosions continued for 30 seconds, ammunition cooking off, fuel tanks rupturing, the internal fire consuming everything. Bannon's crew sat in stunned silence. Jesus Christ, Chen finally whispered over the intercom. Webb, Bannon said, his voice not quite steady. That was a hell of a shot. Sir, Webb replied, and there was wonder in the gunner's voice. I just aimed where you told me. I didn't know it would. None of us did, Bannon said. They sat there for another minute, watching the Tiger II burn. The black smoke rose straight up in the still February air, a pillar that could probably be seen for miles. Bannon thought about the German crew inside. 5 men, probably. Same as his own crew. Probably with families waiting for them. Probably just following orders, trying to survive, trying to get home. He felt sick. But he also felt something else. Relief. Fierce, undeniable relief. Because the 32-pounder worked. Patterson broke the silence. "Sir, we should probably move. That smoke is going to draw attention." "Right," Bannon said, shaking himself out of his thoughts. "Driver, reverse 50 yards, then find us hull-down cover. Chen, report to battalion. Tell them we have confirmed a kill on a Tiger II at 1,500 yards. Tell them the 32-pounder is effective." "Roger that, sir," Chen said, and there was something in his voice now that hadn't been there before. Something like hope. The news spread through the regiment by nightfall. By the next morning, it had reached divisional headquarters. By February 28th, every Allied armoured unit in northwestern Europe knew that the British had a gun that could kill a Tiger II at long range. The reaction was immediate and intense. Regimental commanders wanted A-30 Challengers, battalion commanders wanted them. Every tank officer who'd ever faced a Tiger II wanted them. The problem was, there were only 12 in existence. The War Office, in its infinite bureaucratic wisdom, had classified the 32-pounder program as experimental and had authorized only limited production. The thinking in London had been that the war would be over before the gun could make a significant impact, and resources should be focused on proven systems. Bannon's single kill shot changed that calculus overnight. Over the next 3 weeks, Bannon's Challenger engaged German armor 6 more times. 3 more Tiger IIs, 2 Panthers, and 1 Tiger I. Every engagement ended the same way. The 32-pounder punched through armor that should have been impenetrable, and the German tank burned. The kill at 820 yards on March 4th established a new record for long-range tank combat in the European theater. The German Panther had been in a prepared defensive position, hull down, only the turret visible. Webb had put the shot through the gun mantlet, and the internal explosion had been so violent that the Panther's barrel had been blown 30 feet from the hull. Word spread beyond the regiment. Other A-30 Challengers, distributed to different units, began reporting similar results. The 32-pounder could engage German heavy armor at ranges where the Germans couldn't effectively return fire. For the first time since the Tiger II had appeared, Allied tankers had a weapon that could kill it reliably. The Germans noticed. Captured intelligence reports from early March 1945 showed increasing German confusion and concern. Their armored doctrine had been built around the Tiger II's invulnerability at long range. They'd grown accustomed to engaging Allied tanks at their leisure, confident that their frontal armor couldn't be penetrated beyond 500 yards. Suddenly, their Tigers were burning at 500 yards and more. A captured German tank commander, a veteran Hauptmann from the 506th Heavy Panzer Battalion, was interrogated on March 12th. The transcript made its way to Bannon's division a week later. One exchange stood out. "We were told the Tiger's frontal armor was impenetrable at combat ranges. We believed it. Then my company lost 3 Tigers in 2 days, all penetrated frontally at ranges over a kilometer. We thought you were using a new anti-tank gun. We didn't realize it was mounted in a tank until we captured one of your crew. A 32-pounder? We didn't even know such a weapon existed." The psychological impact was significant. German Tiger II commanders began to engage at longer ranges, reducing their accuracy. Some refused to advance without infantry support, slowing their reaction times. The aura of invincibility that had surrounded the Tiger II since its introduction had been shattered. But the success came too late for widespread implementation. By March 1945, the war was entering its final phase. Germany was collapsing, fuel was scarce, and most of the remaining German armor was being destroyed by Allied air power rather than tank-to-tank combat. The demand for 32-pounder guns was enormous, but production ramped up slowly. By VE Day in May, only 73 A-30 Challengers had been delivered to frontline units. Those 73 tanks, in 6 weeks of combat, had destroyed 47 Tiger IIs, 31 Panthers, and 18 Tiger Ears. The loss rate among Challenger crews was dramatically lower than among standard British tank units, 4% versus 23% when engaging German heavy armour. The 32-pounder had proven itself in the most decisive way possible. It had saved lives. But James Bannon never received official recognition for firing the first shot in combat. The War Office credited the entire 32-pounder programme to the Royal Ordnance Factory's design team and the senior officers who had championed its development. The official history of British armour in World War II mentions the A-30 Challenger in 3 paragraphs, praising its effectiveness but identifying no specific crews or engagements. Bannon's name appears nowhere in the record. After VE Day, Lieutenant James Bannon returned to Coventry. The city had been heavily damaged by the bombing raids, but his family's house still stood. His father had aged dramatically in 4 years, hair gone completely grey, but he was alive. They hugged for a long time, neither of them saying much. Bannon was demobilised in July 1945 with the rank of captain, a promotion that had come through in April, but which he'd barely noticed. He returned to civilian life without ceremony, turning in his uniform and service pistol at the demobilisation centre in Reading. He went back to work at Standard Motor Company, helping his father rebuild engines. The work was familiar, comforting. He married in 1947, a local girl named Sarah who'd worked at the munitions factory during the war. They had 3 children, bought a small house in Earlsdon, lived quietly. Bannon never talked about the war. His children knew he'd been a tank officer, knew he'd seen combat, but he refused to discuss details. Once in 1963, his eldest son asked him if he'd killed anyone. Bannon had looked at him for a long moment and then said, "Yes, I did what I had to do, that's all you need to know." He never mentioned the 32-pounder, never mentioned the Tiger IIs, never mentioned Morrison or Chen or Webb or any of the men he'd served with. Robert Chen had kept his promise to Morrison. He'd opened a garage in London in 1948, using his demobilisation pay and a small business loan. He'd named it Morrison and Chen's Auto Repair, exactly as planned, with Morrison's widow's permission. The garage was successful, and Chen ran it until he retired in 1983. He never changed the name. Chen died in 1987, aged 61, of a heart attack while working on a customer's Austin, Cambridge. The obituary in the local paper mentioned his military service in a single line. Mr. Chen served with distinction in the Royal Armoured Corps during World War II. Thomas Webb returned to Manchester and worked as a precision machinist, making parts for industrial equipment. He never missed a shot during the war and he never spoke about it afterward. He died in 1979. David Hughes went back to Wales, took over his father's farm, raised sheep. He died in 1994. William Patterson returned to Glasgow, drove buses for 30 years, died in 2001. James Bannon died on November 18, 2003, aged 82, in Coventry Hospital. The obituary was perfunctory. Survived by his wife, 3 children, 7 grandchildren, worked at Standard Motor Company for 40 years, served in the military during World War II. No mention of tanks, no mention of the 32-pounder, no mention of the 7 German tanks he and his crew had destroyed. The A-30 Challenger that Bannon commanded in February 1945 survived the war and was eventually donated to the Tank Museum in Bovington, where it sits today in a corner of the exhibit hall. The placard mentions that it mounted the experimental 32-pounder gun and saw combat in Germany in 1945. It does not mention James Bannon's name. It does not mention the kill at 500 yards on February 27, 1945. In 2018, a military historian named Dr. Catherine Morrison, Peter Morrison's granddaughter, was researching British tank warfare for a doctoral dissertation. She came across a reference to the 32-pounder program in the War Office archives and began digging deeper. She found the after-action reports from February-March 1945. She found the engagement logs that listed the first combat use of the A-30 Challenger. She found references to Lieutenant J. Bannon and traced him through military records, pension files, and eventually to his death certificate. She located Robert Chen's son, who still ran Morrison and Chen's auto repair in London. She interviewed him, learned about his father's service, about Morrison's death, about the promise they'd made. She found Thomas Webb's daughter in Manchester, who had a single photograph of her father's tank crew, taken in March 1945. 5 young men standing in front of a Churchill tank, squinting in the sunlight, looking impossibly young. Her father had never told her their names, but the identification was written on the back in faded pencil. Bannon, Webb, Hughes, Patterson, Chen, March 1945, Germany. Dr. Morrison's dissertation, completed in 2019, was titled The 32-Pounder Gun and the Evolution of British Tank Warfare, 1944-1945. It dedicated an entire chapter to the first combat engagement on February 27, 1945, and properly credited Lieutenant James Bannon and his crew for firing the shot that proved the weapon's effectiveness. The dissertation received little public attention. It was published by an academic press, sold perhaps 200 copies, and is now available primarily through university libraries. But Dr. Morrison did one more thing. She contacted the Tank Museum in Bovington and donated her research. In 2020, the museum updated the placard next to the A-30 Challenger. It now reads, A-30 Challenger, experimental tank mounting the 32-pounder gun, saw combat in Germany, February-May 1945. First combat kill achieved February 27, 1945, by Lieutenant James Bannon and crew, 5th Royal Tank Regiment, engaging a Tiger II at 1,500 yards near Goch, Germany. The 32-pounder proved capable of penetrating the Tiger II's 200mm frontal armor at ranges previously thought impossible, fundamentally changing Allied tactical doctrine in the final months of the war. It's not much, a small placard in a museum that most people will never visit, crediting a man who died 17 years ago and never sought recognition. But it's something, and maybe that's enough. If this story moved you, if James Bannon's quiet courage and deadly accuracy deserve to be remembered, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel to hear more stories of forgotten heroes who changed the course of history with innovation and bravery. Drop a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us if you visited the Tank Museum in Bovington. Tell us if anyone in your family served in armored units during the war. These stories need people like you to keep them alive. The 32-pounder gun was a triumph of engineering that came too late to change the war's outcome, but it saved lives, real men who came home to real families. And the man who fired the first shot in anger, the man who proved it would work when everyone else was just guessing, went back to Coventry and fixed engines and never said a word about what he'd done. Thank you for keeping James Bannon's memory alive. Thank you for caring about real history, about real people, about the moments of innovation that emerge from the crucible of war. We'll see you in the next story.